Did Donald Trump really anticipate the kind of response Iran has mounted to the United States and Israel's war? Reports say a tug-of-war is underway inside the White House among Trump's aides over how to declare victory, even as the Iran war continues to escalate and expand across the Middle East. Is the Iran war costing the United States and ordinary Americans much more than Donald Trump had anticipated? Estimates suggest the US spent more than $11 billion in just the first 6 days of the conflict, with the real cost potentially far higher as operations expand. The war and the resulting oil price spikes have also meant that Americans are paying much more for fuel than they did before the start of the war. Trump tells G7 leaders that Iran is about to surrender as Tehran's leadership has been wiped out. But 24 hours later, Iran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei vows to continue the war and exact vengeance. Iran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei declares that the country would keep fighting and is determined to exact vengeance as well as to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. Netanyahu fires back, says he would not issue life insurance policies to Iran's leadership. Meanwhile, the extent of Mojtaba's injuries sustained in the war remain unclear. Trump says the Iranian leader is alive in some form. Has Vladimir Putin emerged as the biggest winner of the Iran war? With energy prices surging and Western attention shifting towards the expanding confrontation with Iran, analysts say that Moscow could emerge as the biggest geopolitical beneficiary. After stating that the Iranian men's football team can play the 2026 FIFA World Cup, Trump now warns that it may be unsafe for them. As US-Israel strikes continue relentlessly against Tehran, the latter hints its athletes may skip the tournament being hosted by the US, Canada and Mexico. In an important decision, the Supreme Court rejects a petition asking for menstrual leave for women to be made mandatory at the workplace. The court warns any such move could end the careers of women as companies may stop hiring them altogether. The opposition escalates the battle with the Election Commission as 130 Lok Sabha and 63 Rajya Sabha MPs sign a notice seeking removal of Chief Election Commissioner Gyanesh Kumar. The move is backed by India bloc parties which have accused Kumar of bias and electoral manipulation. Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You watching Headlines at 8 with me, Neha Khanna. Our top story. Did Donald Trump really anticipate the kind of response Iran has mounted to the United States and Israel's war? Did his team war game the full extent of how this conflict was likely to play out and for how long? Most importantly, just what was the end game they had in mind? And are they any closer to achieving it? In fact, many analysts are now asking, did the United States bite off more than it can chew as it followed Israel into this ill-advised war? Going by most accounts, it would seem that the US president and his close aides who jumped into this war headlong are now scratching their heads trying to find a way out of the morass this war has clearly become. News agency Reuters has reported that a complex tug-of-war is currently underway inside the White House, and that is what's driving Donald Trump's constantly changing and often contradictory public statements on the course of the Iran war. The trouble for them is this. Even as Trump and his close aides debate when and how to declare victory, the conflict is only widening and spreading across the Middle East. Some officials and advisors are warning Trump that surging gas prices could exact a political cost from the US-Israeli attacks on Iran, while some hawks are pressing the president to maintain the offensive against the Islamic Republic. The behind-the-scenes maneuvering underscores the high stakes for Trump, who returned to office last year, promising to avoid stupid military interventions and forever wars. And what have the Americans got instead? The biggest US military operation since the 2003 Iraq War. 2 weeks after Trump plunged the US and in many ways the world into this war, it has rattled global financial markets and disrupted the international oil trade. The result? The global economy is now bracing for a major oil shock and skyrocketing inflation, not to mention the possibility of a full-blown recession. The jostling for Trump's ear is an integral feature of his presidency, but this time the consequences are a matter of war and peace in one of the world's most volatile and economically critical regions. Shifting from the sweeping goals he framed in launching the war on the 28th of February, Trump in recent days has emphasized that he views the conflict as a limited campaign whose objectives have mostly been met. One day, Trump says, Iran must surrender unconditionally. The next day, he says the war is going to end very soon as there is hardly anything left to hit in Iran. The third day, the US president claims Iran wants to surrender, despite the fact that Iranian authorities have only displayed a much bigger appetite for war than Trump could have possibly anticipated. No wonder Trump's constantly shifting stance and contradictory messages have only caused consternation for the energy markets, which have lurched in both directions in response to his statements. Economic advisors and officials, including from the Treasury Department and the National Economic Council, have warned Trump that an oil shock and rising gas prices could quickly erode domestic support for the Iran war. Some of them are now urging Trump to define victory narrowly and signal that the operation is limited and nearly finished. Pushing in the other direction, however, are hawkish voices urging Trump to sustain military pressure on Iran. These include Republican lawmakers such as US Senator Lindsey Graham. They argue that the US must prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and respond forcefully to attacks on American troops and shipping. A third force comes from Trump's populist base and figures such as strategist Steve Bannon and right-wing television personality Tucker Carlson, who have been pressing Trump and his top aides to avoid getting dragged into another prolonged Middle East conflict. So here's what's happening. One Trump advisor has been quoted as saying, he is allowing the hawks to believe the campaign continues, wants the markets to believe the war might end soon, and his base to believe escalation will be limited. In taking America to war, Donald Trump offered little explanation, and the administration's stated war aims have ranged from thwarting an imminent attack by Iran to crippling its nuclear program to replacing its government. As he seeks an exit from an unpopular conflict, Trump is trying to juggle competing narratives that some critics say have complicated and already difficult situation, with Iran defiant despite the devastating US-Israeli air assault. Trump's public shift to downplaying the war's impact, describing it as a short-term excursion, and his insistence that gas price hikes would be short-lived, experts say, appear to be aimed at calming fears of an open-ended conflict. Some top aides are pushing Trump to work towards a conclusion to the conflict that he can call a triumph, even if much of the Iranian leadership survives, along with remnants of a nuclear program that the campaign was meant to target. While the US and Israeli strikes have killed a number of top Iranian leaders, among almost 2,000 people since the war began, and sunk much of the country's navy, the military achievements have been seriously undercut by Iran's stepped-up attacks on oil tankers and transport facilities in the Gulf, driving up oil prices. Not to mention the fact that the war has spilled over into more than half a dozen other countries in the region, making it more difficult to predict what comes next. Critical to the war's final trajectory will be the Strait of Hormuz. A fifth of the world's oil shipments, which normally traverse the narrow waterway, have come to a standstill. In recent days, Iran has struck tankers in Iraqi waters and other ships near the strait, and the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has vowed to keep the Strait of Hormuz shut. If Iran's stranglehold on the waterway pushes US gas prices high enough, that could increase political pressure on Trump to end the military campaign ahead of the country's November midterm elections. And let's not forget, US intelligence has indicated that Iran's leadership is not at risk of collapse anytime soon. Analysts say some of the confusion over the Iran war's trajectory appears rooted in the quick US military success in Venezuela. What Trump and his advisors failed to grasp is that Iran is no Venezuela. If the war drags on, American casualties mount and the economic costs multiply, analysts say it could erode backing from Trump's political base. So just what are Trump's options now? What will he do next? It's a war he started along with Israel. But is it up to him to end it? Is the Iran war costing the United States and ordinary Americans much more than Donald Trump had anticipated? The US president has been escalating his rhetoric on the Iran war, saying the United States has totally destroyed what he called Iran's terrorist regime, both militarily and economically. Trump claims Iranian defense forces have been decimated and has warned that the US would continue its assault with unparalleled firepower, unlimited ammunition, and plenty of time. His message suggests that Washington has no plans to halt the campaign against Iran anytime soon, even as Tehran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has vowed to keep fighting. But behind the thunderous declarations lies the staggering price of war. Reports indicate the United States spent more than $11 billion in just the first 6 days of the conflict, with the real cost potentially far higher as operations expand. Administration officials have told lawmakers that $5.6 billion worth of munitions were used in the opening 2 days alone, at one stage costing nearly $2 billion a day. Washington initially deployed some of its most expensive precision weapons, including the AGM-154 Joint Standoff Weapon, before shifting to cheaper systems like the Joint Direct Attack Munition as the war stretched on. With weapon stockpiles shrinking and the conflict still raging, the White House is expected to seek tens of billions of dollars more from Congress to sustain the military campaign. The war's economic shockwaves are now rippling through global markets. Oil prices have surged sharply since the conflict began, largely due to fears that fighting could disrupt shipments through the vital Strait of Hormuz, a narrow corridor through which nearly a fifth of the world's crude normally passes. International benchmark Brent crude has surged to around $100 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate has climbed close to $96, a dramatic rise from pre-war levels that were near $70. The spike has triggered alarm among investors, sending long-term government bond yields higher as markets brace for widening fiscal deficits, rising defense spending, and the mounting economic burden of a prolonged war. For ordinary Americans, the conflict is already hitting where it hurts most, at the petrol pump. The average gas price in the United States has jumped to about $3.6 per gallon, up sharply from under $3 just weeks ago, squeezing households already grappling with tight budgets. Economists warn that if oil prices continue climbing towards $100 a barrel and beyond, fuel costs could soon reach $4 per gallon, raising the risk of inflation and even a potential recession. Despite the growing pressure, Trump insists the spike will be temporary. He has defended the war as necessary to eliminate a security threat, even as polls show rising public concern that the conflict with Iran could spiral into a prolonged crisis with far-reaching economic consequences for the United States, the country that started the war.
And as we take decisive action to stop the threat posed by the terrorist regime in Iran with Operation Epic Fury. Is that a great name? Well, it's only good if you win. You know, you can only do. And we've won. Let me tell you, we've won. You know, you never like to say too early you won. We won. We won the bet. In the first hour, it was over. But we won. But they gave me a list of names at general. Sir, you can pick the name you'd like, sir. I said, the name of what? The name of the attack on Iran, sir. And they gave me like 20 names. and I'm like falling asleep. I didn't like any of them. Then I see Epic Fury. I said, I like that name. And I can only say this. They were all prepared. They're very strong. You know, they're going to try and take over the whole Middle East. They were going to knock out Israel. They don't know what the hell hit them, right? They don't know what hit them. They got hit by the American military. They don't know. They say, what the hell is happening? They didn't expect anything like this.
US President Donald Trump told other leaders during a call with the G7 nations that Iran is about to surrender after nearly 2 weeks of war. According to reports, Trump told the leaders that Tehran's leadership had been wiped out and that no one remained to formally announce capitulation. But is that really true? Barely 24 hours later, Iran struck back with defiance. The country's new Supreme Leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, issued his first public statement since taking office, vowing that the war would continue and promising vengeance until fully achieved. Far from collapsing, Tehran has signaled it is escalating the pressure, threatening to choke off the critical Strait of Hormuz to gain leverage in the widening conflict with the United States and Israel. Interestingly, the tense phone call with the G7 leaders also saw Trump openly mock British Prime Minister Keir Starmer over his initial refusal to allow US strikes from British bases. Trump reportedly told the British leader his offer of support had come too late and that the help was no longer needed. Defiance from Iran has met with open threats from Israel. In his first remarks since taking power, Iran's new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei declared that Iran would keep fighting and continue using the closure of the Strait of Hormuz as leverage against the US and Israel. The message, read on state television rather than delivered in person, vowed vengeance until fully achieved and warned Gulf nations hosting American military bases that they could become targets again. Just hours later, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu responded with a threat of his own, saying he would not issue life insurance policies for Iran's leadership. This as Israel pressed ahead with its devastating military assault on Iran that has already killed thousands. The war is showing little sign of slowing on the battlefield. Drones were reported flying across multiple Gulf states, including Kuwait, Iraq, the UAE, Bahrain and Oman, highlighting Iran's ability to keep striking despite weeks of intense bombardment. The conflict also took a new turn when a US military refueling aircraft crashed in western Iraq in an incident involving another aircraft. Washington says it was not caused by hostile fire. Since the joint US-Israeli strikes began on the 28th of February, at least 7 American troops have been killed. At the same time, Tehran has threatened to keep global oil shipments blocked through the Strait of Hormuz until the attacks stop, a move that has already pushed oil prices sharply higher and sparked fears of one of the worst energy shocks in decades. Amid the chaos, Donald Trump struck an aggressive tone, boasting that US forces were totally destroying what he called Iran's terrorist regime. Posting on Truth Social, Trump claimed Iran's Navy and Air Force had been wiped out and warned that US possessed unparalleled firepower, unlimited ammunition and plenty of time. Yet, even as he projected confidence, questions swirl over the fate of Mojtaba Khamenei himself. The Iranian Supreme Leader has not appeared in public since the war began, fueling rumors that he was seriously wounded in the opening strikes that killed his father, Ali Khamenei. Trump has said the Iranian leader is still alive in some form, even as reports speculate he may have suffered severe injuries, adding yet another layer of uncertainty to one of the most explosive conflicts now gripping West Asia. Has Vladimir Putin emerged as the biggest winner of the Iran war? As war rages across West Asia, the global oil shock triggered by the conflict is quietly handing a strategic advantage to the Russian president. With energy prices surging and Western attention shifting towards the expanding confrontation with Iran, analysts warn that Moscow could emerge as the biggest geopolitical beneficiary. Rising oil revenues diverted Western military resources and fading focus on the Ukrainian battlefield together risk strengthening the Kremlin's hand at a critical moment in the global power struggle. At the heart of the energy turmoil lies the strategic choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, where shipping has slowed dramatically after Iranian threats to set passing vessels on fire. The narrow waterway normally carries nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply, and its disruption has already sent global crude prices soaring. Inside the Kremlin, Putin has reportedly urged Russian energy companies to seize what he called the current moment, as Moscow senses an opportunity to expand its oil sales just as the pressure of Western sanctions begins to ease. Remember, the Trump administration has already granted India a 30-day waiver to buy Russian oil, which is already at sea, in view of the growing energy crisis in India and indeed around the globe. Russian state media has openly speculated that crude could surge past $150 a barrel, while pro-Kremlin commentators are mocking Western economies, which are bracing for fuel shortages and spiraling oil and gas prices. The economic ripple effects are already spreading through global markets. Higher oil prices are boosting the value of Russia's discounted crude exports, allowing Moscow to sell its energy at smaller markdowns despite sanctions. Analysts say the longer the Middle East conflict drags on, the more revenue Russia could channel into its massive military spending on the Ukrainian front. With the US increasingly focused on the Iran war and air defense systems being redirected to protect American bases in the Gulf, even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has warned that every missile fired in the Middle East is one less available to defend Ukrainian cities, an unintended strategic victory for the Kremlin, but a significant one nonetheless. The geopolitical fallout has become even more complicated after Trump moved to temporarily allow some purchases of Russian oil already stranded at sea in an attempt to stabilize the global market. Critics argue the decision could inadvertently refill Moscow's war chest just as it faces mounting pressure over Ukraine. Meanwhile, attacks on more than a dozen ships around the Strait of Hormuz and mounting fears of a prolonged closure continue to rattle energy markets. Economists warn that if the crisis drags on for months, soaring oil revenues could provide Russia with billions of dollars in additional income, turning a Middle East war into a powerful economic windfall for the Kremlin. In a significant ruling, the Supreme Court of India today rejected a petition seeking making of menstrual leave mandatory for women at the workplace. Chief Justice Surya Kant, while delivering the decision, warned that making menstrual leave mandatory could backfire against women at the workplace. The Chief Justice argued that such a law might unintentionally hurt women's employment prospects and even end their careers. According to him, many employers could simply avoid hiring women if legislation forced companies to grant paid leave during menstruation, creating what he described as a psychological fear among working women and reinforcing the damaging perception that they are somehow less capable than men. The Chief Justice added that while awareness and sensitization about menstrual health are essential, imposing a compulsory legal mandate could trigger unintended consequences. Excuse to sideline women entirely, even suggesting that it could lead to discrimination in recruitment across sectors, including government and judicial services. While the petitioner argued that some governments and private institutions have already introduced voluntary menstrual leave policies and cited the decision by the government of Kerala to allow menstrual leave for women students in state-run universities, the Chief Justice said that voluntary measures differ sharply from mandatory laws. He argued that forcing such policies through legislation could inadvertently deepen workplace biases. That's all the time we have on this edition of Headlines at 8. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend ahead. Do join us again at the same time on Monday.